today on this beautiful, beautiful fall afternoon as we're getting ready to take another trip down memory lane. And I hope that you'll find today interesting and fun. Enjoyed the laughter last time, so there was a lot of good friendship you could tell in the videotape that came out afterwards last time. So some of you were not here last time and some of you were, so enjoy. Beulah will give the kind of the ground rules, I guess, for today. And we thank Beulah and Helen for moderating our program and Hal for videotaping for us today.
Well, you remember, you people that were here the last time, that we did the downtown area. We went 3 blocks, both sides of the street, and it took us almost 2 hours to do it. And several of you wanted to go to the side streets, and we said, we don't have time. And after it was over, they said, why couldn't we go on? So we decided to do it again and do the side streets along with talking about the street names because they have some interesting history behind them. We're going to start, it's going to be kind of a mixed up affair. We're going to start by talking about the names of some of the streets, then we'll do the side streets and the businesses along the side streets, and then we'll end up by doing more street names. We're going to start with the map that you have is a 1909 map. So many of the street names have been changed since that time. We're going to start in the lower right-hand corner at the corner of Emmett and College. Now, if you can find that. No, wait a minute. Not lower. It's lower left-hand corner, isn't it? Okay. All right, we're going to ask to tell us how Emmett Street got its name. Can you hear me, Jim? How did Emmett Street get its name?
It got its name from my grandfather, Emmett Chapman.
It was his first name. It wasn't the last name in your family.
No.
All right. Then we're going to go to South Street, which is now Home Avenue. Can you find that? No, there's no Home Avenue on there. It's South Street, and then Home Avenue, and then Juneau, and it was Juneau then. And Tim again?
That was from Washington Street down, clear down to Kennel Avenue, which is Juneau Street.
And Juneau was named after your mother, or?
My mother.
Yeah.
They could see both houses going in through, when there weren't any houses in there.
Yeah. Then it goes on now into Fleming Boulevard, and eventually, when it turns the corner, it's Charles Street. All right, now we're going to go to what is called on your map River Street, which is now Park Avenue. And Helen's going to tell us the story behind that. Can you all find it?
When Helen Murray went off to college after she graduated here in Rensselaer, she didn't want anybody to think she was a river rat, so she said she didn't want to be known on River Street as her address. So her father told her to get up a petition and go up and down her street, and if everybody signed it, they would change it to what she wanted. There was a ballpark out at the very end of River Street where they used to play baseball and do their Sunday afternoon affairs. So they all signed up, so when Helen went off to college, it was to be known as Park Avenue. And she wasn't going to be known as living on River Street.
That's how Park Avenue got its name. All right, now let's come back and we'll do the cross streets along there. Can you find back where we started from, Emmett Street, and then the next street was Cannell, named after the Cannell family. Then you'll notice, can you find it? And then Odell Street comes in there. And Helen can tell you how Odell Street got its name.
Elijah Odell was the first lawyer to come into the new town of Rensselaer. He came in 1849, and he built a new home in 1850 on what is now Milroy Park. In 1853, he went into partnership with William D. Lee, and their office was the first door east of the Dunlap House, where the Forsyth Building is now, and where Fagan's pharmacy is. And it was at that time called the Clark Building. And Mr. Odell dissolved his partnership with Mr. Lee, and he sold to Robert H. Milroy his law office and his house in 1854, and Mr. Odell moved off to Iowa. He was the first lawyer to come into Rensselaer in 1849, so the town was fairly new at that time.
Now, if you follow Odell Street on across the river, it becomes Work Street. Now, does anyone know why it was called Work Street? I know.
Was that the minister's name?
Yes, I doubt if that
Not
would
I
be
don't think
the
so,
reason.
because the works were later people.
Yeah, later than that. Well, I know we always called that bridge the Work Street Bridge. And then you go on down and it becomes Grace Street. And you follow it on out and it becomes the Hanging Grove Road. And now it's all Grace Street. Now, you want to tell about how it got the name Grace Street? Not after Grace Packard.
Should have been.
Should have been, but it wasn't.
It was Harry Curley, wasn't it, that came to town, and he first married Grace Thompson. And she passed away, and then he married her sister, Edna. And so it was named Grace Street after Grace Thompson.
That's Mrs. Simon Thompson, Judge Simon Thompson's daughter.
I have a question.
Yes.
Why is Hanging Grove called Hanging Grove?
George, do you know?
No, there's 3 or 4 different versions.
There is a story that someone was trying to find their way to the Fork settlement, and they were directed to a place where the trees were all hanging down. And I think that's more the reason. A lot of people used to say it was because someone was hung out there, but I don't think anybody ever was. Yeah. Yes.
It's the water oak trees that, in that area, the real wet ground, and there's pin oaks and water oaks. Their limbs start almost horizontal, but they keep it drooping, so they're hanging. That was the idea. And when you got to that, well, then you're supposed to go north to the ridge.
Yeah. Did I answer your question, Paul?
Yes.
All right, now we're going to do, go back, we've done Campbell and Odell. Then the next street is John Street. And Paul, I think you live on John Street, don't you?
Yes, and I've often wondered why it was
Does
named.
anyone know why John Street is called John Street?
Wasn't it from the John Robinson?
Any idea?
They owned lots in there.
Did
The
they?
Robinsons did.
That could very well be. And then we come to and it stops on your map right at the Manette School property. But now, of course, it goes clear on out to Sparling. And since that's my neighborhood, I live on the corner of Grove and Augusta, and Augusta was named, Fred Phillips developed that property out there, and Augusta is named after Grace Augusta, his daughter. The next street is Francis Street, and there was another daughter in that family by the name of Francis, and so he named that street Francis. And it's now quite a long street. My street's only 1 block long. Francis Street is about 3 or 4 blocks long now. They've resurfaced it, and it's quite a nice street now. Then J Street comes in.
They stopped.
It could be, or J. Williams. I think they owned that land out there at one time, and that
This
could be.
street was named Beulah from
What?
J. The person that had the automobile agency for years ago was
Yes, I thought about that.
Hoover and somebody.
Claire's J, yeah. It could be. And then, of course, Manette Street runs east and west. And then we have Swartzwell Drive, and then all of it ends on Sparling Avenue. Do you want to tell about Sparling Avenue, how it got its name?
There was a man here by the name of Samuel Sparling. He was quite a developer in the town, and so I think he lived out in there.
I think the farm, the barns across where the St. Joe owns it now, once belonged to the Sparlings, and they built those barns back in there. All right, now we're going to go along to past Washington Street. I don't think we need to discuss how it got its name. Milroy Avenue, and it was at this time called Milroy Avenue, but that was not its first name. Its first name was McCoy.
McCoy had come here in about 1850 from Columbia, Ohio. And he married Mary Jane Hargison. And they started the bank with the Thompsons. The McCoys had two children, Martha, called Mattie, and Thomas, Jr. And about 1906, the bank went under, and they were very, very angry. And so they dynamited the house where Rodney Lewis lives now. And the McCoys left town. So then they called it Milroy.
And about that time was when the women got together and decided to that they wanted to buy that park where the Milroy home had been and put up the statue. Tim?
She said they dynamited the house. The story came to me from my father and best friend. My grandfather had some money in there, and McCoy got mixed up with Richard, who's in New Orleans. And my aunt, best friend, said I should quit telling people that her father dynamited it. All he did was give the dynamite to Andy Sissel and did it $25. Andy Sissel was a tinsmith that worked for him.
I thought
Somebody's got a picture of that.
I thought you might tell that
Oh,
story.
yeah.
Bill Woodworth has a picture of the house when it was dynamited.
Didn't it blow the piano from the first floor to the top floor or something? Was there something about a piano being moved by the dynamite?
They took out the windows on the east side, but he told me to be sure there wasn't anybody in the house when he did it. They blew the side of it out.
Alfred and his wife lived in the brick house, and they built this other house for their son Tom. And that's the one that got dynamite,
Yeah.
because son Tom got blamed.
Well, I saw the pictures 2 days ago, and the west side of the house, the bottom of it is blown out probably 6 to 8 feet. The whole side of the house, and it's leaning against what's left of the house. So it was a pretty good blast.
Okay, now we're going to go across, go back to Washington Street and cross the river until we come to Front Street. I think it's pretty obvious how Front Street got its name, being on the riverfront. And it probably was. Then we're going along Washington to Van Rensselaer. And of course we know how it got its name. And then we come to Cullen. So would you like to tell about Cullen Street?
John Van Rensselaer had married Angelica Livingston, and they had Robert. And Robert was a soldier in the Revolutionary War. And that is the name of the DAR chapter, and that's where we got our name, was from the founder. And his wife was, Robert had married Cornelia Rudson. That's where Rudson Street came from. And they had James and Susan and Cornelia. And the father of them had married Angelica Livingston. And,
Well, isn't Cullen Street named after Mrs. Van Rensselaer's maiden name was Cullen, wasn't it?
yes, Robert married Cornelia Rudson. And that's where we get the name of Rudson. And then Robert Jr. had married Susan Delaney Cullen.
No. All right, and then Weston, yes.
Something I always wondered about, and nobody could answer it for me. Was Cullen Street originally Highway 53, and then it was moved over to McKinley? That's the only concrete street in town, and that's the only logical explanation I can come up with. There is for concrete in the city, or the state road of the highway there at one time.
I don't remember that.
Does anybody know?
McKinley was cemented in 1925 and 26. And the state laid the center. It was 60 foot wide. And the center of it, the state paid. And we property owners paid for the 10 feet on each side, because that had about 140 feet there.
Well, I've never found anyone who can answer that, but it seems only logical that the city would not put a concrete street in, and it junctions with 114 eventually, so.
I don't know. Okay, let's go on. She's talked about Weston, the daughter of Mr. Van Rensselaer was married to, was it a daughter?
Yes.
The daughter
Susan
married to a Weston.
Henry
Yeah.
Weston.
And then we have McKinley, which was Division Street. It's marked Division Street on your map. And I think probably named after the president. And on McKinley, we're going to stop here and talk about Memorial or Flatiron Park. It was called Flatiron Park first and then changed to Memorial Park. And there's a good story about how that rock got brought in, and Helen's going to tell us that.
Have you ever wondered where that rock came from?
Yes.
How did it get there? Well, Mrs. Charles Henry lived on McKinley. I think in a house where
Mildred
Mildred
McKeemer.
McMahon lives now. And she came in with the idea to move this large rock that lay in the bed of the Iroquois River out by the Gangwell Bridge. And her idea was to honor the men who had served in World War I, and Abel and Coke. And all the boys right in there, Lefty, had all played over there in that flow park as ball kids. And on McKinley Avenue, located across the street from where Jackson's funeral home now is, this triangle piece of property that belonged to the Clark family. And since Lefty had also served in the World War I, the property would be given to the city if they could get the rock that Mrs. Henry wanted to be mounted on a base in the park on this plot. Well, someone offered $300 for the rock to be gotten out of the riverbed and brought in and put on the base. Well, $300 in 1928 and 29 was lots of money. And so Clark Henry offered to do it. Now, he was the brother to the late Terrence Preston Benton Henry, and he was an uncle to Bill Henry, who lives north of town. And Mr. Henry had a team of horses, and I think they probably were the big draft horses. And he thought he could do it. But they hitched the horses to the rock after they got it secured, but it wouldn't budge. And so Mr. Henry then got the idea to go get his steam engine and take it to the riverbank. In doing so, it was on the east bank, and the engineer could not be taken over the bridge because he didn't think the bridge would hold it up. So he built a big fire in the steam engine, got the boiler going, but it still wouldn't come. And Mr. Lee Robinson offered him to sell him a shock of boats. Now, I can't say how many sheaves is in a shock, but probably 6 or 7. And he offered to sell them to him for 50 cents. So he bought them, and they stuck them in the fire pot along with the coals. And then when it got, the steam pressure went way up, they was afraid the thing was going to blow up. So they all jumped off of the steam engine, and the rock came out of the river. They got it on the east side of the bridge, and the county says they can't come across there because the rock will put the bridge into the river. But it could happen later, but Croc waited till all of them went to bed, and then he went back and they loaded the big rock on we used to call them mud boats, but it was like a sled with rudders, it wasn't wheels. And after everybody was in bed, he pulled the rock across with the horses.
Yeah.
And about 3 o'clock in the morning, when they all got up that lived on McKinley, there sat the rock down there on the park.
I think that's a real good
The old
story.
iron bridge over there across the river, the Daniel Farm Gym seemed to be the worst for the wear at all. And we used it many more years. And this was to be dedicated to World War I. And I wouldn't be surprised if the city and the World War auxiliary and all of them didn't go in together and do it. But there was $300 in 1929. $300 was lots of money. That was what Croc often did.
Well, I remember Croc, and I believe the story.
He married.
He would do that.
Okay, now we have, she's told you a little bit about Rensselaer Street and Harrison, probably after the president, and Cornelia, which is now Keller Boulevard, and Angelica and Susan. Angelica and Susan were both daughters of the Van Rensselaers. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the businesses along this downtown area. We kind of covered the streets down there. So we're going to start back at Front Street and Grace. And that is where Judge Mcgraw's house is. And it was built by Simon Thompson. So it's kind of a historic house in itself because he was an outstanding person he was one of about 4 or 5 brothers that came here, the Thompson brothers. There was Alfred and David and Simon and was there a Tom? We were looking at those pictures the other day. And he married a Fultz. And no, that was the high school. I forget what her first name was. Anyway, it was Fultz. Okay, now we're going to go along Front Street, and this is your chance to tell about anything you remember along that street. That's we did talk the last time about the Blacksmith Shop near the Burlap Garage.
The Hemphill that run that.
Oh, what?
Jim Hemphill. Mark Hemphill worked for a while there before he went to become a dentist. He was a welder at that time. And then on the other side, to the south, would have been the Corn Belt Poster, and they run the advertising bills and signs. And then on the other side of that, why, Leroy Anderson had his garage.
That's right, I'd forgotten about that.
That was Hemphill's Blacksmith Shop, wasn't it?
What?
On the south side was Morrison Street. Was that the Hemphill Blacksmith Shop?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Who owned the one on the north side?
Frank King first.
Okay.
That's the first I can remember. That 3 men were. That's where that insurance shop is now.
Yes.
The building went on that.
Right, right. Well, is there anything else on the south side of Washington Street? Okay. We can go on then north, and we just heard about that Blacksmith Shop. And Charlie Rhoades had an electric shop right next door, about where the parking lot is now for Long's.
Was the Knowles building or hotel right there on the corner though?
The Knowles building was on the
North side of Plum Street at Washington.
No, he was
it's on the south side.
Southeast corner.
Southeast corner.
Yeah.
That's the one that was torn down,
Okay.
well,
Practically.
not quite. It was a pretty good building, maybe part of it yet.
Yeah. And then, of course, across the street, well, we did talk a little bit about I.H. Riley's business there.
Yes.
And anything else about that little area in there for Jack Nesbitt's offices?
Just north of that was a buggy shop. And I can't think of the fellow's name. That buggy in there.
Well, you mentioned that the last time, the buggy shop was there.
Yeah, and then north of that, it was low land in there. There was a brick house that my mother told me there was a Chinaman that had a laundry in there at one time. Then after that, Ladesworth had lived there with the park, with the animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we wanted to talk a little bit about ice.
I remember an Oliver tractor dealer probably where that buggy shop was.
Fireball.
Fireball.
Yep. In there.
I remember him, but I don't remember the...
He lived at the corner of his home, was at the corner, the last that I knew was at the corner of Pelham and Susan on the southeast corner.
Right.
Now, Fireball where Woods is?
No, it was further north. Woods was where I.H. Riley's beer distributor. Creamery, I guess.
Viola Glazebrook lived there with her brother in this little brick house. And you walked from the sidewalk, just a little ways, walked right in the house, and that they moved upstairs. Then it was the lower floor because there was 2 levels there. And Mr. Glazebrook kept that little part mowed with a sickle all the way from the town bridge clear down to the Creamery Bridge. He used a sickle. And then he got the idea of starting a little park. He had squirrels. I think he might have got a bear, and he had some deer in there.
Yeah, I can see there at the edge.
Yeah, I see him.
And they have a poet too. Remember that.
About
And the
19...
deer used to get out. Remember that? I remember the smell even. And that's Sonny Rhoades, right?
Yeah, and Charlie.
Uh-huh. And they were right, their house was right across the street, or Charlie's house was right across
About
the street.
1938, they decided Rensselaer should have a public parking yard. So and Viola and her brother Isaac had died. So they just shoved the brick house right down there, just buried it right down in there and filled that all up.
That retaining wall they poured to hold that parking lot, the WPA markings are still in it. It was done with government grant or aid or whatever they had at that time.
Won't the archaeologists have a lot of fun when they dig that up and find that old brick house down there?
Our little daughter started to school that year, put that retaining wall in, and she didn't come home at noon from school. So Edwin went looking for her, because Eddie Hudson said he saw her down there walking on that seawall. So when Edwin got down, so I know it was in 39 when they put the seawall up. Of course, he went down and got her and took her back to school.
Okay, then we go along and we have the mill, which is next to the Glazebrook place. And we all remember that, and the night that it burned, was an exciting time in town.
Yeah, that's the next biggest fire.
This is just like in the movies. I thought that the movie fires were always just very, they just built up a little frame thing and burned it down, but it really looked the same as the fires do in the movies. It was pretty exciting. Then, of course, the Spragues owned it for a long time, and then the Amsters.
Do you remember exactly when that was? The drawing of it?
No, I don't remember the year.
It was 75. I think it must have been late June or early July. It was a warm summer night.
Yeah, I know we had been out of town for dinner and came back to town, and coming towards us was this great big roll of black smoke. It was frightening. Then, of course, we go on down, and the Thompson House is on that street. And it's still a pretty imposing looking place. Now that was DeLoss Thompson's house, and he was the son of Alfred Thompson, one of the original Thompson brothers that came to town. They moved a house away from that spot, and that was the Van Rensselaer home.
We took it over where the telephone office is now. I don't know what they're using the building for, do you?
Yeah, this telephone office still uses it.
That's where they moved the
Storage
house.
place.
And the Thompson's buildings, or Nate's house.
Okay, and then we go on down to, this was probably the oldest part of town. And we find Barber's home was on that street, And then Jack Nesbitt's, which is quite an old house. And then at the end of that block, in that triangle shape, that was known as the Prairie block, was the first school building. You want to tell a little bit about it, Helen?
After they built the first brick school building here in town, Mr. Babb bought the school building over on the triangle. He had it quite a long while, and he did quite a little work to it. And then he sold it to Benjamin Harris. And they had it for quite a while, and they had one daughter, Flora, and she married Mr. Pryor. He came down here from Chicago. He was originally from Canada. He came down and married Flora Harris. And Edwin and his brother were a little place, and they would go around the other corner there where the old Rhoades house was on Susan and College and Lincoln now. And they would watch Mr. Pryor. He had bought a poultry business here in town. He was quite sweet on Miss Harris. So Edwin said several times he'd walk all the way around the triangle twice, and finally he'd get up courage enough to go in and visit Flora. And the folks lived there. So finally he married her, and Mrs. Pryor died in December of 1931, and Mr. Pryor died in 46. So we've always called it the Pryor House, but it was really the Benjamin Harris home. They just had the one daughter.
More Leopold told me that well that sits on that property, he drank out of it when he went to school there. He's a young man. That's what Mo Leopold told me. He said part of the lumber that was in that house was from the original schoolhouse that was there.
Sure getting a makeover now.
Pretty, isn't it? Well, let's move on now to South Van Rensselaer. We'll go back to Work Street on South Van Rensselaer, and we'll do some of the businesses along there. That's the street that the post office is on. Is there anything along in there that you want to talk about in those first 2 or 3 blocks? And we get to Johnny Rusk's, what I still call Johnny Rusk Building. Do you still own it, John?
No.
Well, it was a hitch barn.
Right.
Okay.
Lee.
Anything else? What
Well,
was it?
I have several questions about
Okay.
that, if I may. My dad operated a shop in there for several years before he built out his site. And R.P. Carton was in there. He had Packard and Dodge, I believe. Did you buy from Carton?
Building?
Where the agency or? did
No,
you
the
continue
building
directly?
belonged to Mrs. Horton, Perry Horton's mother.
Mhm.
And it was in her name until she died, and then Perry inherited it. And I bought it from Perry Horton.
Was there any other dealership in there from the time Carton quit until
No.
you took over directly from
Yeah.
Carton? What year was that?
First day of July, 1961.
Of course, Packard was out of business.
Paul dropped Packard after the war.
Yes.
He had
Packard
Packard.
had it out the north side for a while.
No, Curtin had Chrysler something out there.
He had Packard for a short time. Of course, Packard went under in '56.
I didn't recall him ever having Packard.
He did for a short time. But there was
But
no other
no,
dealership. You took
Martin
over.
Martin had half of that building with the tire agency in there at one time.
Yes, he did.
Russ Martin's dad.
And before that was the Gaiety,
Theater in there,
right?
outdoor theater. Perry Horton,
Yeah,
I
just
think
had
held the
walls
record
throughout
for
the-
playing the piano the longest time of anybody in the world at that time. He played it straight
Continuous
through.
hours.
Guinness Book of Records.
Yeah.
Uh,
Perry was quite a gentleman. He'd come in every month, first of the month, you know, and get the oil changed in his car and everything. It held 5 quart oil, but he put 6 in because if 5 quart was good, 6 was better.
That little bit of foam on top wouldn't bother him.
This one. Perry sat down, he'd look around and said, "Well, Russ, you think you're gonna make it?" And I said, "Well, Perry, I made the payroll last week. We'll see what happens next."
I remember some buildings that we had post office at John's building. Kilmer had a bakery in there right after the war.
Well, Phil Woods' dad, old Phil Woods, put that building up. And he was in there, and the bakery was in there for a while, and then Bob Young had a flower shop in there.
Yes.
And his father-in-law had gas sales and stove sales and that in there.
It was a real small building, as I recall.
Yeah, when Carton leased the lot, he was to tear the building down and clean it all off. And so that's what was done. But in the meantime, Joyce Morgan, Leo King owned the lots. And then Joyce Morgan, or Joyce, she was Joyce T, Joyce Morgan, Joyce Sider, and she's gone now. She owned that building, and she owned it up until they sold it to the post office. The post office owns that lot now.
You mentioned King. He had a liquor store along there too somewhere.
Right in the back of Carton's building, in the back corner.
Where that big plate glass window.
Yeah. Then he moved it around in front. Had it in front, or maybe he had it in front first, then he moved it to the back. And then Mrs. Gaines ran a license bureau in there for years. Fern Gaines? Or Cor Gaines? Cor Gaines.
Well, this is around the corner, but it's somewhat connected with that. What was in that station that Johnny Moore had prior to when Johnny was in there?
Morton had that at one time with it was always a gasoline and tire sales as far as I know. I never heard of it ever being anything but that. I think it was always that, but Morton owned it, didn't he, before Johnny Moore got it.
And
Johnny
then he
had it-
sold oil and gas
Huh?
there. Russ Martin sold oil
Oil
and
and
gas,
gas,
as well
yeah.
as tires.
Tires.
That's DX, wasn't it?
What?
DX?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go across the street then from Johnny's building, and we come to Hoover House. Now Hoover House was built by John Werlin, I believe. And he had his furniture store in there. And then eventually sold it to, no, he didn't sell it. He rented the building to the Harrises. They had their creamery in there, Harris's Creamery.
The south part of that building was a grocery store.
Arthur Ames.
Arthur Ames had a grocery store in the south half of it. And there were 2 or 3 other businesses.
Dr. Mackey had his office in the center of it there.
Yeah.
Eyeglasses for years.
Okay, then we'll go along to the next block. And we had the theater. We talked quite a bit about theaters last time. I don't think we'll spend any more time there. Gordon and Keller's restaurant. Grace can tell us all about that, I think.
Yes, I used to work there.
Do the floor plan.
And I worked for Keith Paget and Spike Gamester.
They had it after Gordon and Keller.
Where did Mr. Keller come from? He had one arm,
I didn't know where it came
but he
from.
wasn't a local.
You skipped over several businesses.
Yeah, I know we did.
The corner business, I remember Fearless Cleaners, but it was
Yeah.
probably a number of other things. And Walter was in there with his auto repair. And then that Caney building, which Al Caney had the restaurant, later became Rafferty's.
The bowling alley was there.
Yes.
Very Wild had a beauty station. Down in there somewhere.
Right there where Kenny's was. There used to be Wild Buick sales right there where Kenny's was.
Oh, is that right?
There. And then on the corner, Warden had a harness shop there one time. Louis Warden's father had a harness.
Yes, oh yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Caney building's been a number of things.
Yeah. Well, then, skip on down to the mill irons.
You had made Lou in her little restaurant
And
there.
they-
Keller.
We talked a little bit about them the last time also.
And you talked about last time about the Scott Brothers Harness Shop where the Warden and Keller restaurant was.
No?
And then the Mac Warden was down the other side, which John mentioned. But that's where, just next to the alley, was where they had that little restaurant.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything back up.
Could I ask another question?
Sure.
Does anybody know when Warden and Keller closed and Lundy took over the restaurant there, what year it was?
I'd say it was back in probably 37, 38,
That's what I assumed, as a guess.
because that was about the time that Joe Lundy and several others bought an airplane.
Well, Joe came here to take over that restaurant.
Yeah, from
My
Chicago.
dad, no, he came from Kentland.
Yeah.
Cantlin, was it?
He was a good friend of my dad's, and he talked him into taking that over, so he was a good business owner.
I think his daughter, Marge, just passed away in the
This
last
spring.
year or two.
This spring.
Okay, then we cross the alley and we come to Carl Wood's Barber Shop. Maybe some other things along in there.
The corner was a little restaurant at one time.
Charlie Stout.
Charlie Stout's Silver Grill at one time.
Yeah.
Charlie Stout and Joe Jeffries was in there at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then we did the Beaver building at quite some length.
That Woods Barber Shop was a barber shop for a long time. I used to shine shoes in there, and I had to clean it up on Thursdays, and I remember behind the walls and the partition where they had planted, it was obvious the building was old, and it had been a barber shop for a long time. There was a lot of stuff, old barber stuff.
Okay, let's go across the street. I've talked to Nain a little bit about the corner building there. And she told me something interesting, that her grandfather, Abe Long, bought that building. It was 80 feet across the Washington Street side and went back 150 feet to the alley. And he bought it in 1920 from Abe Leopold. And this is a strange thing. Bought it from Abe Leopold and immediately sold back to Abe 40 feet by 100 feet, which was where he put the bank. Now, did he have something to do with the Farmers and Merchants Bank?
Well, right on the corner used to be a clothing store, Ball's Clothing.
Yeah, Earl.
Yeah, this was after that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think John Eager loaned Abe the money to buy that store. I think it's, I don't know where I got that, whether it got out of that pay-per-view or whether my mother told me.
Well, then Long's owned kind of an L-shaped building, so they owned all those little stores back there, which Emma Reisling had a hat shop, and Leonard Rachel's
Sipping by.
Sipping by.
I've got a picture from 1936 over here on that particular area.
Yeah,
There
good.
was a shoe shop and a barber shop and a sip and bite. That was it at that
Clark's
time.
jewelry store was in there.
Well, Clark's Jewelry Store was a part of the building that Abe Leopold bought back from Abe Long. Now, during the Depression, Mr. Long lost that, and Nain said he owed, she thought, $200 or $300 on it, and just could not come up with it, and so lost it. And I believe that was when the Fendics took over that building. And then we keep on going. Warren's Barber Shop was in there too.
Yeah, it was one.
And then we crossed the alley to Worland's Furniture Store, another building by the Worlands. And then it became Sears and now the Town Mall.
But before they built that building there, my grandfather had a cabinet and coffin shop right there where the building is now.
Oh, really?
And then he lived right on the corner there.
And that's what, I didn't realize that, but Helen was saying that there was an Eager house on the corner.
That was the wise Eager, that was John Eager's mother.
And then across the street, there's another Eager house.
John.
Yeah. But across from Worland's was Ted Humphrey's
Paint shop.
body shop,
Buggy
Paint.
whatever. And they told me this story. You'll all love this. Ted had a dog, and the dog was the only dog in town that ever had a charge account at Long's drugstore. They had in the summertime, their screen door was a swinging door. You just had to go up and hit it. You could go in or you could hit it and come out. And the dog knew that and loved ice cream. So the dog would come in, they would feed it an ice cream cone and write it down on the books, and Ted would come in and pay for it. I love that story. Then across from the Eager house was the Chapman House. And Jeanette, you're here. Maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about Aunt Blanche's house.
We loved it.
Yeah.
A lot of places to hide in it. And I think they put that up for $4,000. And her father lived in that area. He was a doctor here. And where the REMC, now I don't know whether it's still there, on Plum Street, I think, was where he had his horses to make his house calls.
That was Jim and Blanche Chapman, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is quite a story which might be appropriate, might not be, but you take it or leave it. When Jim died, I was taking care of John. And I run over there to tell John about Jim Chapman's death. I thought I was really cutting a big swath there for him. And he said, good. He says, I can leave him $500, I can leave the church $500 more than Jim did. I've always wanted to outdo him.
Oh, that's funny.
That was
When I was a freshman in high school, we had to take botany to Mr. Hoover. Like botany. And Mrs. Chapman had a big, wild flower garden out in her yard, a big circle of it. And I had the pleasure of having a friend that went to work for her. Her name was Edith Clark. She had worked for us when we were smaller children. So I got in good with her, and Mrs. Chapman let me have all those flowers that I needed for my herbarium.
Didn't Edith work for Kurtz's too?
For Kurtz? Kurtz's?
Leroy?
Did she work for Leroy Kurtz too?
Irene Smith worked in
No, I
that.
don't think so. She worked for Helen Hoover. She later married Leighton Gifford.
Did you know Irene Smith?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she worked for Atlanta. When I was thinking the other day, they always got together after they had time off.
Maybe the Giffords can tell you something more about her. Nothing more.
She was my aunt.
Employment map for Indiana Federal is now.
Yes. All right, let's go back across the street. There were some houses, some little houses in there, between there and where Groves lived. And
One of them is where Doris Larsh lived, and they had the Larsh and Hopkins drugstore down on Main Street. And in the next house lived a little family of the Owens. And Mrs. Owens only had one leg, and she went on crutches. And Herbie was about 5 or 6. He wasn't quite old enough to go to school. So when we kids would go back from Long's drugstore, wherever we were, we'd bring him something to eat. His dad run a poultry wagon, I think, for one of the poultry houses here in town. And Herbie didn't get very many pieces of candy or anything. But then there was another little boy, about 2. Then she had an old-fashioned baby buggy that she would walk on the crutches and go downtown to get her groceries and load the baby buggy up with the baby and come back. And she went on these crutches and pushed the baby buggy as she went along. I expect the baby got lots of money. But Herbie was a friend to all of us high school kids. I don't know whatever happened to them.
then, of course, we have the library, the old library, and the schoolhouses, right where we are now. Okay, let's go.
You skipped several businesses in there.
Well, that's what you're here for.
Okay, where the Republican is now was a white front garage.
Right.
And it was an automobile dealership at one time, but I don't know what.
Ken Ford, Pontiac. Ken Ford was in there with Pontiac.
Yeah, no, he never had Pontiac there, John. He moved when he had U.S. Royal Tires there. He
Pontiac
out
there
to the
too.
north end, the Wassons. He took the Pontiac.
Yeah, Pontiac car.
Yeah.
He's old now.
Does anybody know what was in that white front garage?
I was in, well, Joe Kreischer was in there for a while. I remember that. But I don't know who started the garage. I don't remember that.
Then the next building, and it was a pool hall when I was a kid. I don't know. I beg your pardon. The next building was Jose Chalice had a body shop in there. Next
Well,
building.
that's where, you just talked about it, at the body shop. And paint clothes, he worked for him for a long time. Down
Him,
on the
Bill?
corner.
There.
Ted.
Yeah.
And then Arf Caldwell and I had a pool hall in there. The next building. The next building, first thing to drop off location, it's now an oral hygienist or something in there. I don't know what was there originally.
Wasn't there a dish bar in there? Wasn't there a dish bar in there?
I know there was me
No,
there.
it was before St. Humphrey's.
I remember Leeds, I remember the one over on Cullen was across from the Shaver's garage.
My granddad told me right there in the corner where the bank sale, oral bank sale, there was a dish bar in there where you take your horse and buggy and just leave it and down that big.
The one I remember is just the next street over. The Cullen was right on the corner. And that one I remember.
Okay, I think we'll now do Cullen Street. And all I have down for that first couple of blocks is the Comer House, which was a boarding house. And then you come on down the street.
Was that later Deweese's?
Yes, for Deweese's. And then we come to the nurses' home and the hospital. and then the jail. And we go around the corner there, where Washburn and Johnson had their clinic. And there are some pictures up here that show what the buildings looked like before they put the clinic in. And there were homes in there, and it shows those.
Beulah.
Yes.
They had their offices at the back of the Forsyth building too, before they went into that building, didn't they?
Could be.
Washburn and Johnson, they had just a small office there.
Right.
Ackerman's office was in that same location when he was here, where they had been back. I have a question about the Washburn Clinic. Does anybody know when that was built, the clinic?
Do you have any dates on that, Helen, when the Washburn Clinic was built?
That was after Raymond Paulus came back from Wisconsin. So I think it would be in the early 40s. Because Raymond Paulus was the engineer.
You dare tell that story?
I don't know.
It's a pretty good one. I think it'd be all right.
He went to work one morning and Raymond was having all these workers tear it out on one side, and Dr. Riley had a fit about it. We really went after him. And Raymond says, well, you can bury your mistakes, but he says, we've got to tear this out because it's got to last a long time.
I suspect that that building was built sometime in the mid-30s.
Could be. They came back here in 33.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was over there when Dumas Moriarty was remodeling it, and I looked at the hardware and the physical layout of the building and a lot of it. It looked mid-30s to me. The door hardware is very distinctive on the doors. It's all Art Deco. It's very rare stuff.
Going across the street then from where the jail was, yes.
This is not quite as old as going back that far, but I got hung in that building once.
You did.
In the Washburn Clinic?
I'll have to finish it up now. Well, anyway, my neck was stiff, and so when Dr. Ackerman was put a rope on it, and I was sitting in a chair, and I wait. I'm pulling the weight over there, and all of a sudden, the damn chair just fell. Well, boy, what was the nurse's name? She really got busy. You know, she was so excited. But the next time I come in for that same treatment, that chair got big enough to hold an elephant.
Was that Marcella?
Yeah.
I bet it was.
He was all worried me up. I didn't do anything. I just held my feet. I didn't really get hurt at all.
Well, going across the street then, we have the old armory, and that's now the fire station. And going on down the street, the State Bank was where the State Bank is. We had the A&P store.
Doris Miller's house in there first.
And a filling station in there before that too.
Was there?
The old one, they had a filling station in there.
Dr. Roy had an office in there.
Who did?
Dr. Roy.
Oh, okay.
The A&P store was there during World War II when we had such a time getting Karo syrup and toilet paper and all of those things. And Reverend Moore was our minister at the Methodist Church. He was in there one day getting some articles in his basket, and he had a big jug of Karo syrup and some toilet paper and some pineapple and some other things. Two ladies came along while he was getting something else, and they grabbed it. And they got in a fight over it, and they dropped the syrup. And it got in the toilet. He said, I went home with nothing.
Okay. Then the corner where Charlie Roberts is, that was Felder's. Before that it was Ileff's, and before that it was Wallace's. Before that, you fill in the blank, I don't know.
Beulah.
Yes.
On down the street from where the fire station is now, was Dr. E.C. English's home, which is still there.
Yes.
But I think they made it into apartments probably
That's
now.
where Anders lived. Okay, and we talked about the Mckeemer Hotel last time. And we even talked about some of the places behind it. Is there anything you want to add to what we talked about the last time? Talked about the poultry shop there and the
Joe
barber
Sheldon
shop.
was there for years.
Yeah,
What was it, Carol?
Joe
Sheldon.
Sheldon.
He sold to, I can't think of their name now. They were there a long time.
Eldridge and Shoemaker were there.
Okay,
Beulah and Charlie Hemphill have a hitching barn right north of these little stores
Yeah.
also.
he might have.
He did.
It's on the corner, that's where the edge going was. And that long.
Well, then,
That became Hardesty's later on.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
before that, Hugh Kirk had a
Used car.
used car lot there.
Neville was his head man.
Yes. And anything that went wrong, he said, Neville, the little devil did it. Yeah, and then we go around the corner from that. Well, that's, of course, now we know that that was the tavern, you said, Hardesty's, Walls, and our Kreitzer's. Then we go around the corner, and Helen and I took a little ride around there. She was talking about the things that were along that street. The telephone office was there at one time. And Kreitzer's had a
Yeah,
plumbing shop. And then,
Michael's had a plumbing shop.
Yeah.
oh, Michael's, okay.
Well, Hasty was in there with the poultry one
Ice
time.
house.
He hung
Right,
himself in the stairway.
Kreitzers stored their trucks in that.
Yeah, that's where it got started.
Big.
And then the liquor store on the corner was originally Myers's, I believe, and Louis Ramp, and then Jack Brown and Sanders. I don't know what else was in there.
That's the building where the poultry is.
Could be.
Wheel line was back in the back of that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did W. Brown have his place at?
Chicken place.
Right in there somewhere.
It was back in the Mckeemer House, I think,
Put it back.
before Joe Sheldon, yeah.
Kreitzers also had a gasoline station that sat at a 45-degree angle where that
Telephone business.
telephone building is now.
Well,
And-
Standard Oil was there for years and years.
Kreitzer ran, I don't know what brand gasoline.
They was there back in the 20s.
Yeah. An old station, and it was unusual that it faced
Right
both
across the
streets.
Beulah.
Yeah.
Okay, Cullen Street, if you look at Cullen Street, the block that runs between, the street that runs between the Methodist and the Presbyterian Church is wider than any place else on Cullen Street. Anybody know why? Well, Helen will tell you.
Funerals used to either be in the home, the church, or in their home. They didn't have funeral parlors. So the Methodist Church had to have a place wide enough to put their hearse out in the street, because if it was out where the curb was to begin with, they were out too far. And so they took the curb out and moved it up this other way, so that the funeral coach could stop in front of the church, the Presbyterian and the Methodist Church. And then the cars that was going to the cemetery were all back of them. So that was why that 1 or 2 blocks of the street is wider than anywhere else. Because all of the funerals, there were no chapels here until that little one that was back of the Wright's furniture store. And so many people didn't care for it because it was so small. So most of the churches had the funerals. They had to have a street wider so they could load and unload, because it didn't leave any room when it was all out in the middle of the street.
I couldn't believe that when she first told me that story, so I had to go down and look, and she's right.
I remember, I think I was in high school when they did that.
Okay, is there anything else along Collins Street
Well,
going
there's
north?
several things out there. Behind the grocery store that faced Washington, which was, I can't remember the name anymore. Yates. There were 2 or 3 stores in there and Bill Putt's
Yeah,
restaurant.
that's right.
And there was a little bottling plant in
That
there.
was
Rensselaer
Lady's
Bottling.
bottling, wasn't it?
Bottling plant had been
Bill
a
Henry.
blacksmith shop for that.
Pardon?
Helen Rhoades.
I don't remember who owned it. I remember they made blood orange pop.
Yeah.
Every gas station in town carried it. It was fantastic.
Well, Bill Henry's owned that, and then I don't know where they moved down or come from, down there next to Elmer Kaufman's. He had that bottling works down there at one time.
Did the Richards eventually own that?
Hendrix's did.
No,
What about
Richards.
Goldsberry? Oh, Goldsberry can tell you a lot about that.
Goldberg worked for, drove the truck.
Oh, he drove the truck.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I remember all those, they made orange, blood orange, root beer, grape, and lemon lime. And they were not carbonated. They were pop, but they weren't carbonated beverages. They took Rensselaer water and flavored it, slapped the cap on it, and there you went. It was just a little tiny place, about the size of a 2-car garage.
Well, on
There
the
is
side of the
a-
street, you talk
Bottles
about
with that Rensselaer bottling on it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember seeing them.
Harry Randall and Hogan was in there, but they also had ice cream as well as the bottling work.
And of course, the telephone company was next door, or right across the alley. Then that REMC building, of course, the front's all been changed. I can't remember what was there.
And they had John Deere
That was
That's
the
right.
garage, the Schaefer's garage, Gilbert Patches.
and Patches on the corner.
I was up there the other day, called for jury duty, and I was looking it over, and it's been changed 40 times. I mean, there's all kinds of changes. That building's been all types of things over the years, one time or another.
And the Schaefers had owned that garage. There was Paul and Carl. I think Carl was about a year ahead of us, Barbara, in high school, Carl Schaefer.
They built
And
it.
they had a big snowstorm, I think about 27 or 8, and it crushed the roof. The whole roof came in, the
Hey,
building.
whoever put the roof back on it, it won't come down again. Man, it's got a roof on it. Then across the street became the Hoover Hotel there.
Yeah.
When was that? Was it built as a hotel originally?
No, it was one time it was the hospital.
Oh, it was?
Yes.
Dr.
Ah,
Dr. Washburn, it was his hospital.
a private hospital?
Not very long, just a few years until 1918, that was it, when the other one was built, 1916, 17, 18, oh, in there someplace.
And then it became a hotel.
Charlie Moody had run that a while, didn't he?
I think so.
Van Granville Moody's uncle.
Washburn and Johnson had an office back of Fagan's in there at one time.
Yeah.
I don't remember, Eric was in there forever.
Ockerby did too later on.
I was in there when Doc Kirkwood came in with a towel holding his ear.
Ooh, I've heard the story.
So on his ear, and Washburn asked him, I was going to go caddy for Washburn Old Hazleton. And I was waiting for him to get done, and Washburn said, well, you want to anesthetic? No. Kirkwood said, no, that costs too much, it's so long. And he said, you hold the pan for him, and I held the pan, and Washburn scolded on Doc Kirkwood's ear. He run through a fence. He always had wrecks in his car.
Okay,
I've heard that story before. It's got to be true, because you're not the only one telling it.
let's go on now to Weston. I don't know that there's anything on Southwestern that I know of to talk about. Till we get up to the corner of Harrison and Weston. And then we have the hatchery, and maybe Russell would like to tell us a little bit about it.
Well, we came here in 1935 and used that location in 1954 when we had a fire. And then we lived out on a farm out here west of town. And we go down the old barn and build it out there. In the meantime, always, before World War II was on, we built a, well, maybe we went out there and had a sale of land out on each elm. So I went out there and did a tax sale. So I finally bought 3/4 of the lot out there, 3/4 of the block out there for $450 that day. Later on, we kept it and built that big garbage plant out there, 40 with 110, 2.5 stories high, doing the work on it. We finished up our hatchery business out here on the farm in 1963.
Okay, and that is the same location of where Tom Harmon grew up, isn't that right?
Yeah, we moved in at the house, I think, 2 years after they left Rensselaer.
There's the second house from the corner.
Yeah.
The first house, Irene Brown married Bob Kennedy's brother. The Brown family had come from Sheridan, Indiana. This is 5 or 6 miles south of Rensselaer.
Oh. Then there's that Shell station over on the other corner, next to the Huntington House. And we'll go across the street to Ed Harris filling station, which is now an insurance building, but it's been several things, including an ice cream parlor.
Before that house was called Arnott, it used to be the Howard House.
That's right. Okay.
That location where Ernie Shoemaker had that Shell station bringing about was, the house there was originally George Marshall's house. Edison Marshall's father. Right? Wrong? Wrong? Now this I got from Bill Woodward.
No, that's true. That was the old Marshall home there on that corner.
I thought there was a
And
Marshall home.
later Babcock's lived there.
He has some photographs of it too, but that's what he told me today.
I thought their home was over on the corner of, or Catacona across the street.
Well, that would have been where Fred Schultz had that furniture
That's right.
store. That building is old. It
Yeah, but
dates-
there was a house there.
That was a laundry at one time.
I know, but before that, there was a house there.
There was a house there, and they moved it down, and it is now next door to me on the west side. With Reed's farm, Webster Reed farm.
That Fred Schultz building had to have been built at the turn of the century or before. It was an old building.
Well, I don't know. I thought the house that is now down on Lincoln Street was the Edison Marshall home. Well,
The newspaper, that's where I got it.
yeah. Well, anyway, we'll go on. Let's go back. Oh, then the Chamberlain Ice Cream place was along that street too, after you left Ed Harris. Go on down to the corner and the Chamberlain Ice Cream place. Now it's a maybe a recruiting place, and I don't know.
Did they make ice cream there, or did they only store
Yes, they
it?
made it.
No,
I
no,
thought
they made
they
it
did.
because Barry Randall moved over there
Yeah.
from where he was located.
That's right.
And later, he sold off to Chamberlain.
Well, Dick Boyle's dad worked for Chamberlain Ice Cream, and I used to go down there, and he seemed to have a lot of spare time. He built models. We were crazy about gas model airplanes. And I couldn't stand it in that building any length of time because the ammonia from the refrigeration was so strong, it just knocked you down. But he worked in there all day long, and he seemed to have all kinds of time on his hands because he built these fabulous model airplanes while he was at work.
Well, anyhow, they moved over from where they was in the middle of the block on Harrison Street there, East Harrison. And then, of course, they've made a garage out of that later. Ferris has had a garage there. But that's where Harry Randall moved over to, was from that location.
Okay, I think now we've pretty much covered.
You skipped something. Raspberry's Bakery.
Was it on Main Street though?
It was on Washington and Weston, that corner.
Oh, was it?
And then,
Thought we mentioned it the last time.
well, I don't think,
Okay.
you're wrong. But it seems to me that he didn't use the entire building. I think the building was in halves, and he had the east half, but I don't remember what was in the west half.
Well, wasn't Harris there before Schultz? Harris's
Yes, we
memory?
were. But we mentioned that the last time.
Well,
Yes,
I
we
meant
did.
when we got to discussing Schultz.
Now.
And
Okay.
that empty lot there that Jay Stockton owned.
Well, the photography was right on the other side of the.
Pardon?
Parker's photograph shop was right on the other
Yeah,
side.
that, across the street. I'm talking next door to Bridges Bakery on the south
No,
side.
it was on the north side of the street. Parker's had a little octagon.
Yeah,
Harry
yeah.
Parker. Right.
I'm talking the south side. That glazed block building there, that's Rensselaer Auto Parts Machine Shop, originally was Bridges Bakery.
That I know,
The bakery was
Harry
right
Parker.
on the west end of it.
Well, what was on the east side then? The east half of it?
Had a tire shop, a high millimeters tire shop.
Okay.
Yeah, that was right.
But we
No,
turned the fire
on the other
alarm
corner.
one night at Bridges Bakery.
And next to that was a real small lot that Jay Stockton owned. And Ed Harris had a brilliant bronze station in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's where Ed Harris built his first drive-in
And you
station.
couldn't, drive off the street. You had to
Right.
drive sort of like a U in to get gas.
Right. Before he built the other one on West.
We did skip that block when we were doing
And then
downtown.
the next
before.
building was Ray Shoup's Waterway Express office.
Right,
And
right.
Western Union
Yeah.
office.
Now it's on the south side of the street.
Yeah.
The young had,
And the old Republican office is down there too.
the young had his plumbing shop right east of the express office.
There's an alley there. They must have opened the alley later on then, because the express office was right on the alley. They could have opened that alley.
They moved that railway express out
Yeah.
on Vine Street?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Railway Express ended shortly after that, when
Yeah.
Ray got out of it. About 2 years and it was over with.
Yeah.
Didn't bother with it anymore.
Okay, now the rest of our time, I think we will be talking about street names again. And we're going to Grace and McKinley. And McKinley is marked as division. Well, actually, we go to Scott Street. McKinley ends at Scott Street. Scott Street goes out to what is marked Hanging Grove Road. And then it goes right straight north. Now, if you'll notice that the crooked part of Rensselaer, where all the crooks were again, is what was originally the Van Rensselaer property. Then as other people bought, they straightened out the streets, north and south. So we have that very strange center of town with all of the angling streets that come into it and all the little triangles and everything that, yeah. And
It
the
affects
river,
things for several blocks on either side still.
the river too, in this map, that was before it was dredged. And it was straightened out just a bit more.
What year did you say this map was?
1909,
Well, and the river was dredged in 1905,
I know.
and they hadn't changed the map.
They hadn't changed the map. Okay, the Scott Street then goes north and south, and then where it's where you see Hayden Grove Road, then the next east and west street is Emily Street, and then Leopold Street, and then there's Rachel and Milton. Now, those were all Leopold's.
This is called Leopold's Edition.
Yeah, and Milton and Rachel were children of Emily and Abe. Now, how did Melville get its name? That's one we don't know.
Be somebody like Moby Dick.
Might have been. And how about, let's see.
Where are you?
Well, out here, can you find Hayden Grove Road? Okay, it's those 9 blocks in there. You find Milton Street going north and south. You find Rachel Street going north and south. You find Emily Street going east and west. And you find Leopold Street. And then Melville Street is the further street out there.
This is the corporation line.
That was the corporation line, yeah. Yeah. Crosses the Paget Bridge. And I've never heard how Melville Street got its name. Then you go on up and you have Harrison Street coming through. It was Pine Street. And they changed it to Harrison, is that right? Yeah. And then, what is that street? Cedar Street is now just an extension of Washington. There isn't any Cedar Street anymore. And then we go up to Plum Street, and Plum Street is actually an extension of Angelica, so there's no Plum Street anymore. And then we have Cherry, which we still have, and we have Elm, which we still have, and then another Pine Street. But we don't
Vine
think-
and the
Vine Street, yeah, Vine Street, yeah, that's right.
I lived on it.
Yeah, Vine Street. And then there's one called Chicago. And I don't
That's
think
the railroad.
That's the railroad, yeah. There's a street along there too. No, I guess not. Okay, Walnut
Yeah.
and Oak. And then Clark was an extension of Maple. And then Merritt. And then we have Prairie Street, only there is no Prairie Street. We went out and looked. There isn't such a street as that.
Did Merritt Street get its name from John Merritt, who was the father of Dolores and
That's what I've always heard.
That's what I've always heard.
John
Yeah.
Barber.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've done, let's see, Division Street became Main Street, and so now that's still all McKinley. Franklin Street, probably after Benjamin. How about Webster Street? After Daniel, do you suppose? I assume so. Okay. And Main Street, and then we have Dayton Street, which now is just an extension of Weston. And then the street that's Forest Street, which is an extension of Cullen now. And then College Avenue just goes to the river, or go to the railroad, I mean. And I guess it's on beyond that too. And then Jefferson. Well, Clark Street, let's talk about that. That starts at Cullen and goes west, named after Ezra Clark. That was his neighborhood out there, and then Ezra Street is his first name.
He set this up here as Ezra Clark and Newton Clark's addition. That's where the Clark comes from.
And that was to be the town of Newton. After they changed this other to Rensselaer, then they were going to change this to Newton. And it never took off. But anyway, they had a Washington Street on it too.
Another Harrison.
And another Harrison. And so those were changed to Warner and Abigail, yeah. Washington became Abigail, okay.
Was Harrison Street named for Benjamin or William Henry?
Probably Benjamin, I don't know.
Beulah?
Yeah.
Do you know anyone know why they call that Rabbit Town out in there?
No.
That's the first thing I
assume there's a lot of rabbits.
It sure still is called that, isn't it?
Down from the railroad tracks was known as Silver Railroad.
All right, Susan Street runs into Front and then to College Avenue, and then it became, was that Summer Street? South Street, yeah. And they were going to, well, you tell that story. That's your story.
And it was called South Street, and Mrs. Hunt was Helen Wasson, and her father was captured in the Civil War and was sent to Libby prison. And they had built the house right across the street from where I live, where Bill Ogle now lives. And so they wanted to call it Wasson Street, and Mr. Wasson, who was Helen Hunt's father, said, no, let's name it after Abe. So it became Lincoln Street. And then at the end out there to the cemetery, it's Buncombe Road after it leaves the cemetery.
Turns the curve.
Yeah. Okay, then we go on out on Clark Street and we come to Summer Street. And in this map that I have, there is a Summer Street, Helen.
I think there was on this one.
Yeah, so is there still a Summer Street out there?
Yes.
There is.
Sort of a alley-looking street.
Oh.
Going back to that church.
Oh, okay. And then Lucina, now how did Lucina get its name? We know Warner Street came from Norman Warner family who lived there. That's how it was named. Does anyone know about Lucina? Then the next one is Madison and Monroe.
Sounds like the presidents.
And I think those are the presidents. And I think we've gone pretty well around town. The ones over here on the very eastern part were just extensions of the ones, and then there were first, second, third, fourth, and fifth street.
Abigail Street was named for Charlie Roberts' wife. They lived on that street. I think about where Floyd Robinsons used to live. And Mrs. Kilmer lived there. Now, who's there now? I don't know. It's Mrs. Kilmer's house.
That runs right into the cemetery. I think that does it. Unless someone...
I have a question while we have everybody here.
Okay.
I've gotten real interested in Mordecai Chilcote. He had offices in what they call the Mckeemer building. Was that the same thing as the hotel?
Yes, I think so.
And he died in his home on Division Street. Does anyone know if that house is still standing or where the Chilcote house was?
No, I don't know. He was quite a lawyer, and we do have an awful lot of court cases with his name on them. We've been running across, but I don't know that much about him.
Who built that house where Sam and Brent lived on my street? Was that a Children? Name told me one time, it seemed like she said it was a Children. Someone else does.
Well, that wouldn't be Division Street.
No.
Helen Rhoades lived there, didn't she?
Dayton building. It's built long before the Rose. The Rose still lived there when I moved over there in 2 years ago. Too old. I don't know. Well, now maybe they did because that was her mother who built the brick house just to the west of them. They Johnson. That was Mrs. Rowe's mother who built that house. So maybe the Lord. Her mother built that house. Next to that Rose place was beautiful. It went all the way back to the next street and had a most beautiful gardens you ever saw. It had that summer house. Remember Beulah, the big summer house?
Their home. For the big home right next to
Again, once again, your memories are just absolutely amazing. I hope someday I'll have a wonderful memory like all of you. The Historical Society has brought cookies and lemonade, and we hope that you'll stay and visit with one another and enjoy some refreshments. Thanks again for coming. Your stories are wonderful. And keep on reminiscing as you're visiting each other.
Thank you, Mike.
Because